Hi, hello. So, I got my first comment on my video about ContraPoints, and they recommended that I watch an interview between Abigail Shrier and Jordan Peterson. I watched the whole hour and 32 minutes, tried to keep an open mind, and then I remembered that this person wrote this book. And it was a book that demonized trans people who told their stories and experiences being trans. There were trans YouTubers that she interviewed for the book, and she pretty much just used them and misgendered them the whole time. She focused on anything that could be taken negatively of the trans experience into the book, and just focused on detransitioners and fear mongering to portray transitioning as a problem that affects girls who are insecure or lesbians. Here's a good response to the book and a good review with evidence that actually backs up all the arguments. Here was my response after I watched the interview. 99 views in the last month. Look at me go. Sorry, I'm just proud of this video. It's really good. So this is what I said. So I watched the interview I think you're referencing, and Abigail Shrier was bringing up points about how teenage girls are being persuaded into being trans. I understand the concern, but this is just a way to demonize the trans community. She really didn't talk much about the thoughts of trans people in question, because I should have clarified, but she said that she interviewed parents of transgender people, which can obviously have a bias, especially if they're not accepting. And I said, and when she does, which is when she does talk about the thoughts of actual trans people in question, she focuses on people who regretted their transition. The scientific consensus is that this is a very small percentage of people. I think it's less than 1% or is 1% of people who transition, detransition. But even with that, it's usually when they're not accepted by their family, their peers, and in order to please them, they have to detransition, not because of their own will. And sometimes it could be because of complications in surgery or using hormones, which also, again, isn't really because they aren't trans, it's because of those complications. And then you get to the amount of people who actually fully regret transitioning, were not trans, and of course we need to listen to those people, but let me get to that part. So the scientific consensus is that this is a very small percentage of people. We should definitely listen to detransitioners in order to make the medical processes of transitioning better, but it seemed like she was just weaponizing them in order to make the acceptance of trans people as a negative. I haven't read her book, but saw parts of it demonizing trans YouTubers for persuading girls into thinking they're trans. Her whole argument is that women don't know what they're doing, so they get pushed into transitioning to be trans men, which is honestly pretty sexist. I think I said this in my ContraPoints video when I think the same topic was brought up about a lot of women, AFAB people are transitioning, and it's a sexist thing to think that a woman can't make her own decision because she doesn't know herself. It's like, if you really are an advocate for women, then you should want to listen to people who want to transition. Thinking that they don't have control over their own bodies or don't know what they want in life is just, it's sexist. It's honestly sexist, because that really says that you don't see them as someone who knows what they want in life and is able to make their own decisions. Last part, she says that she is supportive of dysphoric trans people, yet doesn't believe that people can recognize their dysphoria later in life, not early in childhood. Not everyone is given the luxury of figuring out their identity early, which is true. There's this whole thing about rapid onset gender dysphoria, which wasn't really a good example. It wasn't a good study at all. There was only a handful of people who were in the study. A lot of people don't recognize that they're trans because they don't know that being trans is even possible. They don't know if they can even transition because of, medical reasons or social reasons. There's not a lot of representation, so if you don't see that someone can transition, then you don't even think that's a possible thing. Like, I personally didn't even know that FTM trans people were a thing until I saw some trans YouTubers that were FTM. I always thought that it was male to female. And so representation does matter. And there's also the fact that some people aren't recognizing their dysphoria until they go through puberty. Like, they often say that it shows up in childhood and people know way beforehand, but if you don't go through the changes of some people, obviously not everyone, go through the changes that your body is expected to go through, then you won't recognize that it's wrong for you. And even then, there's people who push down their identity and try to become normal and like really play it up, being hyper feminine if you're female to male, and you push down the idea of thinking that you're trans because you don't want to go through that. You don't want to go through the possible rejection, the hate. Like, there's a lot of things that go into this. It's not that simple, is all I'm trying to say. People should definitely have time to think about making permanent changes to their body, but I don't agree with her on much. Really, all I agree with her on is that we should listen to detransitioners, because yes, we should, even though there are some that come out the other end and think that transitioning is horrible. Since they did have that experience, they need to be listened to, but not to the extent of taking away healthcare. And also, yeah, she did point out that there's a lot of women who transition, and it's a lot more in comparison to men who transition. I'll talk about that later. I appreciate the recommendation, but this person seems to just want to push an idea that trans people are predatory and that most trans men are not real. Regarding ContraPoints, do you think she's a grifter because she makes money off her platform talking about trans issues, or does it have to do with changing opinions, or is it that she's a trans YouTuber in general? Because they were saying that ContraPoints is a grifter, and I was just trying to clarify because I didn't understand why they thought that. Because I'm bringing all of this up, I was going to make a video responding to this at length, talking about are trans women taking up women's spaces, and why there's a lot of women who are transitioning and things like that. But as I was writing a script for this, I saw that PragerU made a video called Why Girls Become Boys. Okay, so I'm gonna watch this and give my thoughts on it, and if I have anything to add onto the end, I'll do so. I got this ice pack because I got the vaccine and my arm hurts, so just ignore that. By the way, if you don't know who PragerU is, PragerU is a conservative YouTube channel that most certainly is not a university. I think that they tagged that onto their name in order to like increase the validity of their arguments, in order to seem like a legitimate source. They make lots of videos about how the left is crazy, trans people don't exist, apparently racism doesn't exist, etc., etc.
If you know any middle or high school girls today, or if you are one yourself, it would not be surprising if you know someone who identifies as transgender. The latest statistics indicate that 2% of American high school students now identify as transgender, and the overwhelming majority of them are teenage girls. Between 2016 and 2017 alone, the number of females seeking gender surgery in America quadrupled. But if you graduated high school over a decade ago, it was unlikely that you knew anyone who was transgender because, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the condition underlying it afflicted roughly 1 in 10,000 people, or 0.01% of the population. Almost none of these cases were teenage girls. In fact, before 2012, there was no scientific or medical literature discussing adolescent girls who wanted to transition to the opposite sex.
Okay, wait. Trans people have always existed. If you look in other cultures, there's evidence that other trans people existed. The fact that more girls are coming out as trans is it's not showing that this is a trend or a craze. It's showing that there is more acceptance. So a decade ago, there wasn't as much acceptance of trans people. There was definitely still stigma. There's still stigma now, but it's a lot less of transitioning and the fact that someone is trans. And there's a lot more representation in the media. You've got Laverne Cox in Orange is the New Black. You've got, I believe, someone in Henry Danger, like a Nickelodeon show, who's trans. And this is great. This is showing that you can still be a normal person and be trans. And, like, you aren't just going to become a statistic. So yeah, there's more acceptance. There's more visibility, and because of that, people are going to see that it's possible, and people are going to see that they aren't going to be turned away, they aren't going to be kicked out, they aren't going to be killed because of who they are. I mean, it's still a possibility. There's a homelessness crisis of trans people. There's hate crimes that still happen against trans people. There are loads of cases of discrimination in different ways. So we still got a long way to go, but it's a lot better now, so obviously more people are going to be coming out. I drink pink drink, so obviously I'm not a real man. But if I were to give my personal opinion on why I think more girls are coming out as trans, I think it's because the process of like exploring your gender is a lot easier for AFAB people. Like, there's the whole tomboy thing that you're allowed to wear a suit without people going crazy. You can wear makeup if you want or not if you want. You can cut your hair and still be considered a woman. So there's a lot of opportunity to be able to express yourself however you want, more masculinely, and be able to figure out who you are based off of that. I feel like AMAT people aren't given that same opportunity, especially because I would say like cis men are more inclined to set up and enforce this whole idea that men have to be a certain way. So AMAT people are expected to dress a certain way, act a certain way. Anything outside of that, they're considered gay or not real men. Like when Harry Styles was wearing a dress a while ago, people were really upset about that. So there's obviously an easier time for AFAB people, and there's also the fact that transitioning can be easier, especially when it comes to hormones, because some people can just take hormones when they're assigned female at birth and be able to look completely like a man, and they won't have to do much surgery in order to pass. Well, I see AMAB people go on hormones, but their voice doesn't change like it does with someone who's taking testosterone, or their body shape doesn't change as dramatically as someone who's taking testosterone, so there's that too. But they're not going to take, Abigail Shrier isn't going to take this into consideration because all she's worried about is the lost lesbian sisters.
That doesn't mean that we didn't know about transgender individuals.
Yeah.
Gender dysphoria, the severe discomfort in one's biological sex, has been studied for nearly 100 years. It almost always involved boys who began feeling it between the ages of 2 and 4 and were strong and persistent in their assertions to everyone around them that they were really girls. When a phenomenon that affects one half of a population, boys, suddenly begins affecting the other half, girls, and when its age of onset shifts from preschool to adolescence, something significant is happening.
Does she not realize that society changes over time and that acceptance changes over time? This isn't a good point.
In 2016, Brown University public health researcher Lisa Littman began studying the sudden spike in trans identification of teenage girls. She concluded that peer influence and social media influence had a lot to do with this trans teen phenomenon. After all, based on parent reports, none of these girls had exhibited symptoms of gender dysphoria at the age that it typically first presents, early childhood. YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, TikTok, and Instagram all host popular social media influencers, today's version of Hollywood stars, who insist that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, you're probably trans.
Nope, that is absolutely not true. Okay, so let's bring up this study. It says Brown University. I'm pretty sure this is the study that she's talking about. I don't see Lisa Lippman's name. Yeah, Lisa Lippman. Okay. So this is the study she's talking about, and it talks about rapid onset gender dysphoria. First of all, the survey was 250 parents of children. It was not the actual children who were experiencing it, so this is biased, and also a small amount of people, too small to get a final say on it. The children of the parents surveyed were more than 80% female at birth and ranged between 11 and 27 years old at the time of survey, with an average of age of 16. Additionally, 47% of the children were reported as academically gifted, as if that's related, and 41% expressed a non-heterosexual sexual orientation prior to their gender dysphoria symptoms. Most of the parent respondents were female, white, and U.S. residents. Okay, I don't see how the academically gifted part is relevant. Is that meaning that being smart is connected to this? I don't know. But again, she's talking to the parents. Like, that isn't going to be an accurate representation. It could give some say, but that's not completely accurate. In the 90-question survey, Lippman asked the parents about each of the 8 indicators of gender dysphoria in childhood that are detailed by the American Psychiatric Association. To meet the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria in childhood, a child needs to experience at least 6 of the 8 indicators. Makes sense? Must include readily observable signs such as strong rejection of typically feminine or masculine toys and games, a strong resistance to wearing typically feminine or masculine clothes. 80% of the parents reported observing none of these indicators in their children before puberty. So, I don't think that this is a good indicator. Like, speaking from personal experience, I like dolls. I also really liked Batman. Basically what I'm saying is that I didn't like one thing over the other, except I was like more of a tomboy, using that term lightly. Yes, that can be an indicator, but I don't think that is something that you have to check off in order to be trans, because it's more related to your personal experience with your body and how the world perceives you. Strong resistance to wearing typically feminine or masculine clothes. Your parents can force you to wear something. Like, I was told that I had to wear dresses when I was younger, but I mean, eventually, like, I was able to wear like whatever I want. But it's like you can be forced to be a certain way, and then the parents can say later on, "Oh, well, you didn't seem like you didn't like to wear this." Well, it's like that's what I was expected. That's what they're expected to wear, so it's gonna be less obvious when that's what you're told that that's what you should be doing. Among the noteworthy patterns Lippman found in the survey data, 21% of parents reported their child had one or more friends become transgender identified at around the same time. 20% reported an increase in their children's social media use around the same time as experienced gender dysphoria symptoms, and 45% reported both. So, again, representation matters. When you see that something is possible, it's more likely that you will feel a connection to it. Also, there's friend groups of different kinds. Like, you can have a friend group of people who enjoy video games, and maybe that will make you more inclined to find out about video games. Like, I found out something that people who are like neurodivergent tend to like gravitate towards each other, which is kind of funny because sometimes you do it like without even knowing. Like, trans people see themselves in each other, they feel a connection to each other, and are able to feel safe. And as a point that I made in my last video that was about Lil Nas X and his Montero music video, if you look at something and it makes you gay, then if you look at something else, will it make you straight? Like if you watch Montero music video, that can make you a gay devil worshiper, but if you watch a video about a happy Christian couple who is having a family, like, would that make you straight? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But some people just like watch trans stuff because they want to. Like if you click on any trans YouTuber on here, you can see that there's people commenting, well, I'm not trans, I just enjoy your content, I enjoy learning. There's people like that. And on top of that, they aren't influencing people into saying they're trans just because they're uncomfortable with their body. Plenty of YouTubers who say that it wasn't just being uncomfortable with their body, it was being uncomfortable with the societal aspect of like being referred to a certain way, or the like secondary sex characteristics like their chest being associated with the gender they were assigned at birth, which makes them uncomfortable. Like if anyone is saying that just because you're uncomfortable with your body that makes you trans, they are incorrect. That's not true at all, because you can be uncomfortable with your body and it can just be related to, you know, being a bigger person, like being curvier and wanting to fit society standards of someone who's thin. It could be because of like things you were told growing up, like you need to lose weight and this and that. Like it's not automatically what makes you trans. Additionally, 62% of parents reported their teen or young adult had one or more diagnoses of a psychiatric disorder or neurodevelopmental disability before the onset of gender dysphoria. So would that be autism? 48% reported that their child had experienced a traumatic or stressful event prior to the onset of their gender dysphoria, including being bullied, sexually assaulted, or having their parents get divorced. So if that's the case, take your child to therapy. Like a lot of the requirements in order to start medically transitioning is to go through therapy and make sure that there isn't something else going on. Like it can happen of you going through something traumatic and then transitioning would be a way of dealing with it. But I think that you need to go through therapy in order to work through that rather than just going straight into transitioning. People who have autism or ADHD or just like what's the word? When people are neurodivergent in general, tend to see society in a different way and are more open to just like being outside of what people expect. Because it's like neurotypical people see society as the thing that you're supposed to fit in, that's who you're supposed to be. But neurodivergent people tend to be more open to just like not needing to conform. So it's easier to figure out your gender because you're not pressured to think that you have to fit into society that way. This isn't something that can happen for everybody. It's just something that I've noticed because I have ADHD. So I was always questioning society, being like, oh, if I'm a girl, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? Like, it's easier to question, like, why you have to be a certain way. And, like, this isn't to say that autism or ADHD causes being trans, because that's not true. It's just, it's easier for you to figure out who you are. Lippman added that more research is needed to determine the prevalence of rapid onset gender dysphoria, so this is inconclusive. At the next step, Lippman is planning to survey parent-teen pairs where the teenager experienced rapid onset gender dysphoria and their symptoms of gender dysphoria resolved in 1 to 3 years without medical treatment. Why is she planning on only surveying those people? So basically this is inconclusive and didn't have enough people to talk about it. She also talked about the parents, not the actual children that were in question, and didn't give much research. So next point.
Many promise that if you start a course of testosterone, all of your problems will go away.
No one says that.
There's every reason to believe that these girls are experiencing real psychological pain. Rates of anxiety, depression, and instances of self-harm are all at record levels for this generation.
And that is because of a lot of things. And also, you can have those things because of dysphoria. You can get depression because you aren't seen a certain way by other people. You can self-harm because you don't like your body, etc., etc. You can experience all those things and not be trans. If it's related to your gender identity, how you're seen by society, etc., then that makes you trans. But it's like...
A quick fix becomes very tempting. So it doesn't take much, a YouTube video, a friend's suggestion, to get a troubled girl to buy into the fantasy that gender transition is the answer.
That's why you go to therapy.
Unfortunately for these girls who do not have typical gender dysphoria,
and also the fact that not everyone can even go to therapy, like if they really want to help these people, these girls who are succumbing to the whims of transgenderism, then why not make therapy more accessible? How about you advocate for that instead of demonizing trans people?
Gender transition rarely offers relief. And it's a catastrophic mistake for psychologists, educators, and the medical establishment to rush these teens towards a solution that will almost certainly harm rather than heal.
Transitioning doesn't help? Let's look at the facts, shall we, Abigail? Okay, early intervention may improve outcomes of gender diverse and transgender children who are experiencing emotional distress. Comprehensive assessments of biophysiological influences on children may be indicated. Working within an interdisciplinary team of psychologists, physicians, educational specialists, and advocates, and other healthcare and mental health providers who have been trained to work with gender diverse and transgender children is recommended. Continued research on appropriate assessment is currently underway. Given the extraordinary undertaking of a full assessment that is often sought by a consultation, it is recommended that all assessments be conducted by a specialist with gender and sexuality competence. So obviously there's a lot of people involved. It's not just you ask for hormones, someone gives it to you, unless it's informed consent, but that's for adults. Gender diversity and transgender identity occur in all cultural, ethnic, and racial groups. There are three main approaches to psychological intervention with gender diverse children, including a gender affirmative approach, a wait and see if these behavior desist approach, or actively discouraging gender nonconforming behavior. The gender affirmative model is grounded in the evidence-based idea that attempting to change or contort a person's gender does harm. Psychological intervention should aim to help children understand that their gender identity and gender expression are not a problem. Providers should aim to non-judgmentally accept the children's gender presentation and help children build resilience and become more comfortable with themselves without attempting to change or eliminate cross-gender behavior. Children who experience affirming and supportive responses to their gender identity are more likely to have improved mental health outcomes. Gender identity is resistant, if not impervious, to environmental manipulation. Moreover, attempts to change a child's gender may have a negative impact on the child's well-being. So, if you're not accepting of your transgender child, you are most likely making them go through a lot worse mental torment. Providers should advocate for children to be safe in schools while exploring gender diverse expression. Fully reversible interventions such as social gender transition, including changing clothing, name changes, new pronouns, or changes in haircuts, may be indicated for some gender diverse and transgender children. Let people express themselves, see how they do. If things still persist, then you should work something out. No gender-related medical interventions are necessary with young children. The earliest a child should be referred for medical treatment for gender dysphoria is just before the onset of puberty. If the child desires to go through a different puberty than their body would ordinarily experience. Puberty blocking medication can be used to put a temporary halt on puberty and not only allow a child to stop an unwanted puberty, but also to buy the child more time to explore gender before moving into a time when the secondary physical effects of the puberty associated with the assigned sex of the child take effect. Providers can work to develop a network of referrals to include supportive and competent medical professionals and other professionals, etc. If they want to physically transition, puberty blockers is a thing. They are reversible. Once you stop taking puberty blockers, you are able to go through that puberty that you were assigned at birth, and everything is fine. It doesn't affect you negatively at all. I even know this from secondhand experience because there's someone in my life who was on puberty blockers, and it wasn't because they're trans. They're not trans. They just went through puberty at an earlier time in life and went on puberty blockers because, that's honestly pretty hard to go through. And after they came off, they grew up and they're fine, completely fine.
Because here's what's not in dispute. Unnecessary medical gender transition causes irreversible damage, high risk of infertility, sexual dysfunction, and the creation of a permanent medical patient.
Okay, high risk of infertility. Yes, you can be infertile, but there's ways of preserving your stuff in order to have children down the line. Sexual dysfunction, you can get help with that. And the creation of a permanent medical patient, you don't have to be on hormones for the rest of your life. You can literally be on for a year and then go off, and that's that. If you want to be on hormones for longer, then that's something between you and your doctor. And permanent medical patient, aren't there people who have medical conditions that they have to go to a doctor to regularly and have to depend on medication? This isn't just a trans thing.
Tragically, we've made it far too easy for kids to take this path, long before they're ready psychologically or emotionally to make such a life-altering decision. Testosterone is easily obtained by today's teens. In Oregon, a 15-year-old can walk into a gender clinic. Yes, there are now gender clinics all over the country.
Let's look that up. Okay, this is on Snopes.com. Oregon quietly enacted a taxpayer-funded policy that allows minors as young as 15 to undergo gender assignment surgery without the knowledge or consent of their parents. Okay, so Fox News published an article titled Oregon allowing 15-year-olds to get state-subsidized sex change operations, claiming that a recently approved policy in the state enables minors as young as 15 to undergo gender reassignment surgery without the knowledge or consent of their parents. A Portland transgender advocate addressed the claims made in the article, indicating that the assertions were implausible with respect to the mechanics of gender reassignment surgery. Jen Brelton, the executive director of Trans Active Gender Center in Portland, said that the idea of a 15-year-old can walk into a doctor's office, say they want gender affirmation surgery, and get it done without a parent's consent is unrealistic. It's irrational, she said. It's laughable. The Oregon Health Authority also released a statement about such claims, explaining that the age of medical consent in Oregon, 15, and coverage of gender dysphoria as a medical condition is no way suggesting that teens of that age were in actuality undergoing surgery without the knowledge or consent of their parents. So the medical consent age is 15 or older. Patients should be able to demonstrate the capacity to make a fully informed decision and give consent to treatment regardless of age. But nothing in Oregon law requires a healthcare provider to provide medical services to a minor or safeguard the confidentiality of a minor. Providers will encourage family engagement. The only portion of the documents in question pertaining to minors did not mention parental consent and simply referenced medication to suppress puberty in gender-questioning youth. That sounds like it's in reference to puberty blockers. It's true that the age of medical consent in Oregon is 15, whether or not a minor is transgender. And in early 2015, the state of Oregon's HERC did opt to include gender dysphoria in a list of conditions covered by the state's Medicaid plans, but publicized claims misled readers and viewers into thinking that a new guideline had approved sex changes. So that wasn't true.
And walk out the same day with a prescription for testosterone without her parents' permission.
I don't think that's true. I think it's puberty blockers. And also, yes, there's going to be gender clinics because trans people exist.
16-year-old girls have been able to undergo double mastectomies, the removal of both breasts, without even a therapist's note. Predictably, hasty gender transition, remember we're talking about teenagers here, is now leading to a lot of regret. New testimonials appear on YouTube almost every week from teens who acknowledge that they made a terrible mistake and warn others not to make the same one. So how do you protect your daughter from being drawn in?
Okay, but if a trans person on YouTube who transitioned and doesn't regret it talks about their story, they are forcing people to think that they're trans. But if someone who detransitioned comes out with their story about transitioning and regretting it, they are just speaking up. Okay.
To this dangerous and growing trend. First, limit exposure to social media as much as you can. Several academic studies have already linked the alarming rates of anxiety and depression to young girls' punishing experience on social media.
Yes. And you want to know why? Because all people post on social media is the best parts of their lives. So that's gonna make you compare yourself to those people, and that can make you depressed. So I actually do agree with her on one thing, is that you should limit how often you're on social media because it can affect your mental health. So, but also this doesn't make people trans.
A place that often makes them feel sad, unattractive, and alone. Second, oppose the teaching of gender ideology in your kid's school.
What schools are doing this? Schools that are allowing trans kids to use the bathroom of their gender? How is that teaching gender ideology? It's literally just being accepting instead of, discriminating against them. No school is teaching someone to be trans. Literally, they think that acceptance is forcing something onto them.
In California, gender identity education begins in kindergarten and proceeds through high school. The theme is that kids' gender identity is totally independent of their physical sex and something that only they can know.
Yes. Each person individually knows their own gender. And I'm assuming when she says that it's independent from your physicality, gender is a social construct. Your physical sex is different from your gender. It's literally in the definition of sex and gender.
Schools can and should insist that every child be treated respectfully without sowing gender confusion in an entire student population.
Gender confusion.
Third, and most importantly, remember that a teenager is still just a teenager. You don't have to agree with every identity proclamation your daughter comes up with. Knowledge of her identity will develop over time. Until then, being the adult in the relationship is the most loving thing you can do.
What? Again, acceptance is only going to help your child. Let them figure themselves out, because even though you have raised them, you birthed them, and you've known them their entire lives, you don't know everything that goes on in their head. So it's good to be by their side and be there for them. Do not just discourage something that you don't understand, because that's just going to make your child hate themselves. It's not a good thing to do.
I'm Abigail Shrier, author of Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, for Prager University.
Okay, so that was the end of that. So Abigail Shrier is a person who thinks that teenage girls are dumb, pretty much, and are able to fall into trends easily and not know who they are, so they succumb to the pressures of becoming trans because that is the only way that they can fix their depression. Okay, so actually there is a link in the description with the sources, which brings you to their video on their website. I'm surprised they actually link sources. Look at them go. Okay, here's the source about the whole Oregon situation. Minor rights, access, and consent to health care. This is the Oregon Health Authority. So this talks about consent, informed consent, written consent. Okay, so nothing about this even references anything about being trans. There's something about sexual health for teens. That's the only thing remotely close to it. So they just straight up lied. If I'm not seeing it, you can point it out to me. I'll link their links, but yeah, I don't see anything about that. In California, gender identity education begins in kindergarten and proceeds through high school. Let's look at that link. Okay, this is a Word document. Okay, where does it talk about trans stuff? This is too long for me. Okay, I finally found it. This is at point 1141. It's on page 45. Students also learn about individual differences, including gender, from a very early age. Gender socialization begins before children start school. Students may believe that different norms are associated with people of particular genders by the time they enter kindergarten. Yes, this is obvious. While this understanding may be limited, students can still begin to challenge gender stereotypes in a way that is age appropriate. Age appropriate. While students may not fully understand the concepts of gender expression and identity, some children in kindergarten and even younger have identified as transgender and understand they have a gender identity that is different from their sex assigned at birth. The goal is not to cause confusion about the gender of the child, but to develop awareness that other expressions exist. They link this as their sources, and it's not even accurate. This is what I expected. I don't know why they thought that they really did something, because they didn't. Abigail Shrier is not knowledgeable on trans issues, and I do not like her. It's just that people like her really make it harder for us to exist, and it's difficult to watch this and not be upset, because we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of people out there who think that it's okay to hate trans people just because they don't understand. And it's just like, if there's someone in your life, someone that you know, who thinks that Abigail Shrier is a smart, knowledgeable person on trans issues, please let them know that there are sources out there that say otherwise, because we can't let people think like this and not think that medical fields are not going to be affected. And this shows why it's so important for us to be visible and vocal, because we exist and there's no reason that we shouldn't. So thank you so much for watching. If you're still here to the end, I really appreciate you. I'm glad that the person who commented about Abigail Shrier brought this up, because I didn't know the extent of what she stood for. And watching that interview did open my eyes. It was just to the fact that even though we are progressing, there's always going to be people like this. Alright, thank you for watching. Be nice to people. Have a good day.